Okay, here we are, Monday night. Parshas told us, although tonight's shir has nothing really to do with the parsha. So if that's what you came to hear about, I'm sorry. I apologize from the get-go. The topic is the Amsterdam rabbi who was thrown out due to allegations of plagiarism. Throughout, it's not just the Jewish world, but the entire world, the academic world, the intellectual world, or Bechlal, the Welt. It's so common that we hear geschmacke ideas, geschmacke Vertelach, a good word, a good joke, a cute piece of wit, an idea discovery, an invention, or in Torah, a chiddush in Torah, an idea, a good question, a good answer. And it's human nature, maybe it's a negative nature, but it's part of human nature to want to take credit, especially if when you say it, people think it's yours, and even if you, at the end, you plan to tell them who you heard it from. But the reaction was so favorable, it's almost like, why spoil it and say you heard it from somebody else? Let them think it's yours. Right, and that's the more innocent version. But this idea of plagiarism, of taking credit for somebody else's hamtzah, for somebody else's idea. So it's an old issue, and the reason it relates to today or tonight is because it's the yard site of Rabbi Dovid Lida. Rabbi Dovid Lida was in the 1600s, he lived in quite a few cities. He was a rabbi in many towns. It's not a new thing that a rabbi can have 10 different cities on his resume, not lasting in one place more than a couple of years. Listen, Balbatim can be a tough crowd, right? This Reb Dovid Lida had at one point been a student by the great Rebbe Reb Heschel. So he was a great scholar, no doubt. And at some point in his life, in the latter part of the 1600s, he makes his way to Amsterdam. And he was not there for very long. He was accused of Sabbateanism, which was those years. 1666 was Shabtai Tzvi's big year, the year he turned 40. And that was the year when Nosson of Gaza and publicized and sent letters, etc., etc. I was spoken about in the past. And there were many rabbis at the time, it might be surprising to say today, but who believed in Shabtai Tzvi even after he converted during that very year. There were many that still believed that Mashiach's coming soon. The Rambam Paskins, one is allowed to convert to Islam under duress, and the Shabtai Tzvi's life was in peril. So this Reb Dovid Lida was accused of Sabbateanism, but in addition, he was accused of plagiarism. He wrote a number of Sfarim. One of them is the Migdal Dovid, on Rus, on Megillus Rus. And the claim was that he Pasha took the ideas, or the work itself, or the ideas from one of the students of Reb Chaim Vital, printing it in his own name, and the Olam was furious. And he was thrown out of Amsterdam. Now, Amsterdam was a city of tolerance. Right, you can get away with anything in Amsterdam, right? Even today. But back then, the Yidden there they had patience and tolerance. But nonetheless, this guy was thrown out of town. And he went to Rabbonim, the Vad of the Arba Arotzes, the Council of the Four Lands, petitioned his case. Ultimately, he was found to be innocent of some of the charges. He did return to Amsterdam, but then he left again. And ultimately, I think he passed away in Lvov. He's buried in Lvov. So he was removed from his position, and maybe due to some pressure he was allowed back in, but it didn't work out. They didn't re-embrace him. Although there were two communities, there was Ashkenazi, the Sephardim, it wasn't. Nonetheless, apparently it was not a perfect situation, far from perfect. So he left again. And he wrote a long work about this called the Be'er Asik, where he defends himself and attacks those that he's antagonizers. And in addition, there's a long work written called the Toldos, stories, the happenings of the family of this Rabbi Dovid Lida. And if somebody wants to really analyze the whole story, the information is out there and available. And the question becomes, so what if he plagiarized? By the way, the Chidah, he says, yeah, it's true. It's true, it's what happened. But in the beginning of the book, he hints to the fact that the source of the material is from a mocker, from the source of Mayim Chaim, of the living waters. The name of the person he allegedly plagiarized from, his name was Chaim. So it could be that was a hint. But would that justify, would that be enough? Hardly. So the question is, so let's say it happened. If it happened, what's the big deal? Is it a prohibition? Is it considered theft? How does halacha view that? So interestingly enough, this is not the first time or the last time it's happened. One of the fiercest feuds in the Rishonim was between the Ravid and the Baal Hamor, Reb Zrachia Halevi, and the Ravid, who was a couple of years older than the Baal Hamor, and they were both living in Provence, in southeast France. And this is the same Ravid, the third Ravid, the famous Ravid who critiques the Rambam. And when he critiques the Rambam, you think he's a little sharp. But that's nothing compared to what he writes here about the Baal Hamor. He says the Baal Hamor and his father, they came here to our side of town. They don't know what to do. He accuses them of ignorance and the grievous errors. And he also accuses them of plagiarism. He accuses the Baal Hamor of being mis'atif b'talus she'enei shaloi, wearing somebody else's talus, wearing somebody else's outfit, displaying, portraying, proposing Torah ideas as if they're his own, and in truth, they're not his own. So the Ravid already accuses the Baal Hamor of plagiarism. And a well-known episode happened in the 1500s between two great individuals that were spoken about, Rabbi Yitzchak Arama and Rabbi Yitzchak Abarbanel. We had a class once all about Abarbanel, and not too long ago we discussed Rabbi Yitzchak Arama, the Akeidah, the Baal Akeidah Yitzchak. Both of them lived through the 1492 expulsion of Spain. Both of them went to Italy, to Naples, and Rabbi Yitzchak Arama passed away shortly after. He arrived there, maybe a year or so later, and the Abarbanel lives through a number of cities in Italy, Monopoly, Venice, and ultimately he passes away a little later. Rabbi Yitzchak Arama was a little older than the Abarbanel. Apparently, the Abarbanel even supported him financially at some point. But Rabbi Yitzchak Arama's son, Rabbi Meir, writes in a letter that in the works of the Abarbanel, there are many ideas that come from my father. Many ideas that come from my father. And you know what the issue is? If the Abarbanel would say where he got it from, Mela. He doesn't quote my father. He comes across as if it's his own ideas. And who knows, in the future, people may say, my father stole it from him. So let me set the record straight. My father wrote it first. These are his ideas. The Abarbanel got wind of them and displays them as if it's his own. So it's quite an attack from Rab Meir, the son of the Akeidah Yitzchak, This is something which is well known. It's a Rabbi Meir Arama. He leveled this accusation, although the purpose wasn't to smear and bashmutz the Abarbanel chas v'sholom. It's not the purpose. He says, I don't want people in the future to think that my father plagiarized Abarbanel. It's the other way around. My father's the source of the ideas, and give credit to where credit's due, etc. He just wants to set the record straight. The shaila is, so what was Taka the Abarbanel doing? Does the Abarbanel feel that you don't have to give credit to where credit's due? Is that what he feels? The Abarbanel in the end of Amos comments on something the Radak quotes from his father. And the Abarbanel says, why is Radak quoting this from his father? It's clear in the commentary of the Ibn Ezra, Rabbi Avraham Ibn Ezra. They stole it from him. What's this about? Stealing ideas of others. The Abarbanel says, what's this? Plagiarizing. Taking somebody else's idea and marking as if it's your own. She criticizes them. So the shaila is, so then, what happened with him in the Akeidah Yitzchak? Did he not do the same? So if you look at number 1, this is from an old print of the Akeidah Yitzchak. Somebody wrote a foreword, and in the foreword, he quotes to show that there are parallels between the Abarbanel and the Akeidah Yitzchak. And he says like this: "V'nei kol kaira," anyone that reads masculine, anyone that can discern, you will see be'ein b'chinasa, you will notice when you compare the words of these two chachamim ha'ela yachad, the two chachamim together, that the Abarbanel Zal, he saw the Baal Akeidah. Loi behepich, not the other way around, the Akeidah got it first. I'm sorry, that the Akeidah took it from the Abarbanel. Fakert, the Akeidah had it first. And the Abarbanel saw it. And when he says, Ukvar motza chacham echad, the Abarbanel writes in one place, a certain chacham already found, Sheitake hints to the Baal Akeidah Zal. But the issue is that Umashaloi, his kirigam came to Mamori Parsha Seitzei, the Abar Parsha Seitzei, he quotes an idea from the Akeidah, but he makes no mention that he got it from somewhere, passing it off as if it's his own. So how did that happen? So this fellow writes like this: who believes Sophic without questions, Kishkoga Shiyotzim Lifnei Ashal, was an accident. It was a mistake. It wasn't intentional. Could be he was planning to write and then he just didn't get around to. Who's writing this? How long ago was I don't know.
How does this person have the ability to go and give us facts?
Well, no, he's offering possibilities. Hold on. He gives a few. Listen to what he says. Yeah, but he's trying to defend Abarbanel, to make sense of what happened. Ki Chalila, so hold on. Saying it's a mistake, it was an accident. We don't know if it was deliberate.
You're doing Abarbanel a disservice by saying it was a mistake.
It was a deliberate. It wasn't deliberate. Ki Chalila, he says, Fakir, what's the other option? God forbid to think that a Chacham Gadol, a great man, a wise man, a God-fearing man like the Abarbanel, Asher Chibur, he put together more than 10 Sfarim which are very precious, Yikarim Moed, which all testify his great wisdom and his tremendous knowledge. Yachboitz li'schabed oid b'ksas divri zulosai, as if the Abarbanel didn't have enough covet coming his way, he needed to take credit for somebody else's ideas. Can't be. It can't be deliberate. Impossible. It has to be. It was accidental. The efshar could also be, hold on. Gam, ba'avur shechibe pirushay zeh al sefer dvarim. What he wrote in Parshas Kiseitz is part of his comment to Sefer Dvarim. Now this he wrote when he was young, bimei b'chrusay. He was about 24. Shoiket al shmor, he was in the city of Lisbon in the year Reish Mem Beis, which is 1482. Now it says here he was 24 years old. He wasn't, because according to what we know, he was born in 1437, which would make him a lot older than 24 by 1482. But either way, he says it could be he wrote this when he was younger, and it could be at that time he wasn't writing it to publish. It was personal. He didn't have intention at the time to print it. Kiyim, he wrote it la'atzmai, Levad himself. What he was mechad, he wrote down his own ideas, and what he wrote in other books in those days. This is the mid 1400s. printing presses only come in the end of the 1400s. And even then, they were just mechanical machines. If you had a Sforim were rarity. So he had the manuscripts of Akeidah Yitzchak. He copied some ideas for himself. Didn't know when he would see those manuscripts again. Al Kain, therefore, loy hutzrich. It wasn't necessary to mention on every mimer, which is taken from elsewhere, the name of Baal of Harishonim, who's the source material. Now, after years went by, he decided to print. Okay, nishka chadav. And then it was only printed afterwards in Reish Samach Beis in 1502. Towards the end, the Abarbanel passes away 1508. And in 1502, he printed it. Years after he wrote it. Decades after he wrote it. Was willst du von him? And then it came, K'moshe Atel von him. Oi, he gives another possibility. Hold on, he's not done. He ain't done.
He's not done making it look bad.
No.
Good.
Ulai, perhaps his kishmei betchila. Now listen to this contention. He says, he proposes that the Abarbanel originally wrote the name of the Akeidah. When he brings the ideas, he quotes from the Akeidah. V'rak, but then, achre shenevet ha-sefer hazeh mimenu, the Abarbanel lost some of his own works. He traveled from Lisbon, he came to, he had to leave there because of a scandal. He was accused of an uprising, a rebellion, so he had to flee to Spain. He was there for 10 years, and then in 1492 he's out. And he goes, there was lots of picking up and moving, and each time he lost all of his money, he always had to restart, etc. And when he rediscovered his work on Sefer Dvarim, V'loi Motza, he didn't find it, only 10 years after the expulsion in the island of Corfu. When he went to Napoli in 1492, so after that there was the French invasion of Napoli, so he had to flee, and he was in all different places till he came to Venice. He spent some time in Corfu. While he was there, magically, somehow, somebody had a copy of some of his works. Could you imagine? Like he writes in his introduction, and his Peterson Sefer Malachim, during those 20 years, now, did he see, when he was in the island of Corfu, and he rediscovered his work, was it the work that he wrote? No. It was a copy, somebody made a copy, someone else made a copy. So what he's seeing is the manuscripts of somebody else, but rewriting his work. The people that copied it over took out the name of the Akeidah Yitzchak. Now why? Hold on. He says, during those 20 years, people's hands got, Sholtu Boyedei, people's hands got mixed in. And they were mashmit, or not even the first ones that copied it over, but the later ones, they took away the name of the Baal Akeidah. You know why? Because they thought if we remove the Akeidah's name, it will be more honorable to the Abarbanel, that these are his ideas. Instead of the Abar coming across as someone who needs to quote, he doesn't need to quote anything. All of the ideas are his. They thought they were doing him a service. If people would assume that his entire sefer is from him alone. Great stature, right? He doesn't quote from nobody. He doesn't need favors from anyone. So they thought that they were they were doing him a service. These are the theories of this particular individual. But it's well known that...
If Abarbanel's a descendant, say thanks, but no thanks, guy, just take that out of my grandfather's repertoire.
So if you don't want to accept any of these possibilities, we are left at saying that Abarbanel deliberately omitted the name of the Akeidah. When the Abarbanel accuses the Radak of doing the same thing to the Ibn Ezra's ideas.
Did anybody accuse the Abarbanel while he was alive?
It only went public towards the end of his life.
So you never gave him the chance to explain himself.
That's true. Yeah, as far as we know, nobody asked him while he was alive.
It's not a proper accusation against him. You can answer really simply. Why didn't the Akeidah himself, why did he wait? Why did his son wait? Why didn't the Akeidah, who saw the Abarbanel printing...
He didn't. The Akeidah passed away first. The Akeidah was older than the Abarbanel. He passed away first, so he was unaware. It was only printed. Akeidah passes away 1494. This was only printed after 1500.
By the Abarbanel.
Right, so Akeidah himself had no idea.
And the son ever approached the Abarbanel like the way he should have and said, "Listen, what's your answer?"
Not that we know of. Not that we know of.
It's not
Right,
really
okay.
standing on much.
Fine. Anyhow, so this was one of the great historical episodes. And the question is, hold on. Is there room to say that the Abarbanel knowingly, deliberately, willingly did what he did, and maybe it's actually okay? The Abarbanel does write, I think it's in his commentary, Nachlas Avos, to Pirkei Avos, where he actually seems to say it's okay. The Torah belongs to the whole Jewish nation. The Torah is anyone's property. Someone comes up with an idea, it's not his idea. It's part of the general corpus of Torah. It's up for grabs. That's what he seems to write elsewhere. So then we have a bit of an internal confliction in the Abarbanel's own worldview of plagiarism. We move on. Number 2 is a cute story. You have to have a cute story here and there, right? So the Minchas Chinuch, right? Rabbi Yosef Ba'abad sounds Sephardi, but it stands for Ben Av Bezdin. He was Ashkenazi, Achsidish, a brother-in-law of Reb Chaim Tzanzer. So he lives in the times of the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Minchas Chinuch Shiger Pam, he sends his sefer to a relative that lived in Jerusalem. Okay? And the sefer yet was not well known. It was early days. Right, we've said the Minchas Chinuch, in fact, had many, many manuscripts that he wrote, and somehow they were destroyed or stolen. And he was downcast, crestfallen. And he told his brother, Reb Chaim Tzanzer, all I have left, I have this Minchas Chinuch, a little commentary I wrote on Sefer HaChinuch. So his shvager said, for you, it might be a little commentary, but I promise you that the world's going to be koching in until Mashiach comes. So he encouraged him. It may be small in your eyes, but for the world, it's going to shake the world. It's going to kick the world. So he sent it to a cousin of his in Yerushalayim. Now, this guy in Jerusalem was not a great scholar. But in Yerushalayim, then the Maharil Diskin, the great Gaon, the Maharil Diskin, who we spoke about today in Shir with the Bochrim. So he lived the end of his life in Eretz Yisrael. So this guy comes in, he starts quoting kashas to the Maharil Diskin, things that he saw in the Minchas Chinuch, but he didn't say where he got them from. So the Maharil Diskin was so impressed by this guy's knowledge and the sharpness of the questions that he began to honor him, respect him. Now many people were nearby and they couldn't understand this puzzle. This guy was a regular guy and all. He was known as the Ish Pashut. He wasn't a scholar. He wasn't someone you would see learning late. He was a regular guy. And all of a sudden the Maharil Diskin, the great Gaon, looks at this guy as a huge scholar. It was a puzzle. It was a riddle. Until the Minchas Chinuch, the Sefer, came to Yerushalayim and people started learning it. And then the secret was unraveled that all of these guys' questions, each and every single one of them, were straight out of the Minchas Chinuch. So it doesn't pay at the end of the day. It doesn't pay because if the secret is revealed, then it's quite humbling. So the shaila is okay, fine. So that's the risk maybe you'll take. Maybe that's the risk you'll take. Is there a prohibition? So it says in Pirkei Avos, Kol ha'omer davar b'shem omeroi, whoever says something in the name of the one who came up with it, the originator of the idea, you bring Geula to the world. As it says, Esther said to the king in the name of Mordechai. If she would not have said it in the name of Mordechai, the whole Purim story would have come out differently. Achashverosh wouldn't have owned Mordechai anything. And who knows, the whole story could have been different. The Geula may not have happened. It only happened because she said it b'shem Mordechai. The Gemara in Masechta Megillah Daf Tesvav quotes this idea as well. It doesn't quote from Pirkei Avos. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Lazar the Amayra quoting Rabbi Chanina. Word for word the same thing, as it says in Pirkei Avos. So the Maharsha says, what's this? Pirkei Avos, quote Pirkei Avos, it's Mishnayos. Here you're quoting an Amayra. So not so fast. It's from the 6th parak in Pirkei Avos. It's from the 6th parak. The 6th parak of Pirkei Avos is actually not a Mishnah. Only the first 5. The 6th parak is a collection of braisos. It was known as the parak of Kinyan Torah, of how to acquire Torah. And the custom was that every week between Pesach and Shavuos, there are 6 Shabbosim. So for 5 of them, you read one of the Mishnayos of Pirkei Avos. The last Shabbos is right before Shavuos. What better way to come to Shavuos than to read something about Kinyan Torah, all the beautiful things about Torah? So there was this 6th parak. It's a collection of braisos. So says the Maharsha, the Amoraim knew Mishnayos. They weren't Pekim in braisos. So Rabbi Lozer, in the name of Rabbi Chanina, didn't know this 6th parak of Pirkei Avos that every kid knows. So to them, it was their idea. Which is interesting. What the idea of Kol Omer Dovid B'Shem Omer, they're not even saying B'Shem the Braisa that preceded them. Just a little ironic, right? The idea of not doing plagiarism, they don't even quote in the name of, of the source. And Maharsha says they were unaware. Normal. They didn't know all the Braisas. So you have this idea. Now, this idea, it's true, but it's in Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos is Mila de Chasidusa. It's pious activity, right? We learned in Hameniach, whoever wants to be a chassid, one of the things to do is to be Mekayim Mili de Avos, the ideas of Pirkei Avos. So it's kind of beyond the letter of the law. In addition, it's said there's one of the 48 ways to acquire Torah, and it's at the end. It's like after you've done everything else, you come here. It's like after everything else, they come here. The order is essential as well, right? They say 7 things by a chacham and chilufeim begolam, that the golam acts the opposite as the chacham. By the chacham, the last thing he does is moed ala emes, he admits on the truth. When we say chilufeim begolam, the golam does fakert, it means the golam does the same 7 things, just the opposite order. The first thing he does is moed on the truth. He walks in, claps on the bimah, Rabbi say, I got to tell everyone the emes. The chacham does the same thing, but it's the last thing on the list. The golam, the first thing he does is moed alem. So this is the last of the kinyanim, the ways to acquire Torah. It's not said in the way of a prohibition. If you do it, you bring geula. It's like a beautiful idea in Akeidah, but you can hardly learn a prohibition from there. That would be what it seems. Look in number 4, a Gemara in Saita in number 4. Amar Abevo. This is a famous Gemara in Saita Daf Mem. Meireish Hava Amina. Originally I said, in Vasna, I know, I'm a humble man. Kiven de Chazina le Rabbi Abba de min Akku. But then I saw Rabbi Abba from Akku. Da Omar Ihu Chad Time. Rabbi Abba de min Akku was a Rosh Hashiva. And when he would give shir, he would tell over the ideas to his meturgim, to his spokesperson, and then the spokesperson would get up and beautifully and loudly elaborate on the idea of the Rosh Hashiva. And Rabbi Abba told the spokesperson one logic about a certain din. And Amoire, the speaker, gets up and he gives a completely different explanation for the halacha. Chad time. V'loi kopid, and Rabbi Abba sat there. He didn't mind. He said, Zol Zayin. So you have over here somebody speaking. Now, when the Meturgeman speaks, everyone thinks it's coming from the Rosh Hashiva, right? And he's saying something else. So here's the opposite issue. He's not taking credit for something that's not his. He's attributing his own idea to somebody else. And this is kind of the flip side. The other side of the coin of our discussion is there's taking credit for somebody else's idea. What about fakert? You want an idea to sell, so your name tag, you give somebody else's name to it. It's like there are many commentaries in the gamut of Torah Shabbal Peh that are attributed to Rashi. Rashi on Medrash Rabbah, Rashi on Pirkei Avos, Rashi on Megillas Tainus and the Masechta Tainus, and there's many of these commentaries on Pirkei Avos are not from Rashi. So the Chidah and Arichas about it, Divrei Hayomim and all different things. It's not from Rashi, but It was a commentary from a Rishon, but the sellers are publishing it. But how's it going to sell? If you write Rashi, it's going to sell. So they wrote Rashi, and it sold very well. It sold very well. So this is another big shaila. Can you take ideas that are from Yankel and say they're from Beryl, or your own idea, but you want it to sell, so you give the name of a big gadol? So that seems to be the case over here, that this fellow, this interpreter, the Meturgaman, the Maggid Shir gets up. He's speaking. He's giving over his own ideas, but everyone thinks it's Rabbi. So the Maharsha says, listen, what if this guy was selling the crowd Lakshan? What if this Meturgaman was saying stuff which Bechlal never began? I mean, completely off, wrong logic. And Rabbi Abba sees that everyone thinks this is his idea. He would have to protest. He would have to get up and say, I never said that, that's your idea, so what are you doing? He would have a responsibility to do so. If a rabbi knows that somebody is saying something false in his name, he has an obligation to protest, says the Maharsha. It happens to be, though, that this Meturgaman was a fine scholar, and the logic he was saying was good. It just wasn't what Rabbi told him. So Rabbi said, you know what? Okay. But it was an offense, because this Meturgaman is supposed to say the fact that he changed the logic was a big slap. No one knew. The crowd didn't know. It was between him and the Rosh Hashiva, but this was a big patron upon him. As if, I know better. I know better. And Rabbi Abba said nothing. So says Rabbi Avo, that's humility. So Amina, after I saw that, I said, Lav an vasana. I'm not humble compared to Rabbi Abba. So the Gemara says, okay, but Rabbi Avo originally thought he was a humble man. Let's hear something about him. Umay an vasnuse de Rabbi Vo. What's Rabbi Vo's story? Because one day, Amr lo dvisu da Amoire, because Rabbi Vo had there's Abba and Rabbi Vo, two different people. Rabbi Vo one day was also giving shir, and he also had a Meturgaman that would give the beautiful lecture on his behalf. And one day, the Meturgaman, his wife, tells Rabbi Vo's wife, they're having a wife-to-wife discussion, right? The wife of the Maggid Shir tells the wife of the Rosh Hashiva, who's sitting there in the back, and the Maggid Shir is the one who's bellowing and explaining, but it's all the ideas of the Rosh Hashiva, apparently. So she told the wife of Rabbi Vo, Ha didon, my man, loy tzarich leili didach. My man doesn't need your man. My husband could give the shir without your Rosh Hashiva, without your husband telling him the ideas. She doesn't need. I v'hai degochin. Why does my husband lean down to hear something for your husband? The Zokif, and then he gets it. You caught a ba'amudov. It's just for respect. It's just a little respect. Edafim, she doesn't need him at all. So what did this wife do? She told Oslo Dvisus, Rabbi Vo's wife. She was so hurt by it. What did she do? Of course, she told her husband. Va'amale, she told Rabbi Vo that how did the wife of the Meturgaman know that? She must have heard from her husband. So this is how news gets around. The Meturgaman didn't tell Rabbi Vo. So he told his wife, who told Rabbi Vo's wife, and she tells Rabbi Vo. And what his response was? He says, "My nafka lichmana, who cares? Between me and him, the Eibishter will be praised. Torah will be taught. Who cares?" But that's what Rabbi Vo said. But he said that doesn't come to Rabbi Abba. Because by Rabbi Vo, the Meturgaman just said, really, I don't need you. By Rabbi Abba, the Meturgaman Taka gave a different explanation. He didn't just say, I don't need you. He Taka acted upon it. I Taka don't need you. He gave like a different shir almost. And Rabbi Abba said nothing. So that's one of the stories in the Gemara about intellectual honesty or dishonesty. But in Yevamos and number 3, Bachim, this is a classic. Rabbi Yochanan the Amoira had a student, Rabbi Elazar. And one day Rabbi Elazar was sitting and he told over a chiddush that was from Rabbi Yochanan. But he didn't mention Rabbi Yochanan's name. He didn't say the name of Rabbi Yochanan, passing it off as if it's his. This is the case of plagiarism. the idea with Rabbi Yochanan's, Rabbi Elazar shares it in a shir to a crowd and does not attribute it to its creator, to its founder. Rabbi Yochanan heard about it. Ikpid, he was very upset. And if Rabbi Yochanan gets upset at you, it's not good. Look what happened to the brother-in-law Reish Lakish. You don't want Rabbi Yochanan to be upset at you. So immediately, Ula Gabe Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi, two of the great scholars in Israel at the time, they came to Rabbi Yochanan and said, you got to cool off. Loikak, they said, there was a story in Tiberia once. Benager sheyesh beroisha glustra, Gemara in Erevin. It's a story that there was a door that was held in place by a certain bolt that had a glustra. It had a head, like a head. There was a head at the end of this bolt. Anyhow, it was used to hold the door in place. And the shaila is, but using it on Shabbos, I don't know, it looks like boine, it looks like binyan. Somebody watching might think you're involved in binyan, right, which is one of the lamates malachas. So Rabbi Elazar said you can't do. Rabbi Yossi says, what do you mean? You can use this stick and use the head at the end of the stick to smash garlic, to smash. It has so many uses, no one's going to think that if you put it by the door, it's considered building. Anyhow, the machloikas there became so intense until they tore a sefer Torah b'chamosim with their anger. The rabbis tore a sefer. Now, Fleck, do you think they tore a sefer Torah? Can't be. Elaimon nikra. They didn't tear it deliberately, it kind of tore on its own, but because of their anger. The fight became so severe and intense, a sefer Torah was torn during that fight. And Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma was there and he said, this shul will one day be a church. He says, Tameani, he says, I wonder if this shul won't turn into a church, into a base avodah zarah, the chain have, and that's what happened. So they were telling this to Rabbi Yochanan, you got to cool off. You can't be so angry. When there's anger in the base medrash, Sifrei Torah get burnt, the place turns into a church. What do you think Rabbi Yochanan did when he heard that? He got worse. How the ikbit fei? Rabbi Yochanan got it. He said, Chavrusa nami? He said, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Elazar, who had that debate, were contemporaries, they were comrades, they were friends. So the anger there was out of line. Here, Rabbi Elazar is my student. I need to chastise him if he's out of line. So then Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi came and he said, listen, there's a pasuk in Yeshua that said that Yeshua taught the Yidden everything he heard from Moshe. So Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi asked Rabbi Yochanan, do you think that when Yeshua gave a shir, every time he spoke he said, I heard from holy Moses this, and this. Do you think every halacha Yeshua said, he would preempt it by saying and introduce it? I heard from Moshe? No. Yeshua sat and he was Deirish, and everyone knew it was Moshe's Torah. So too, Rabbi Elazar, your student, is giving a shir and he says ideas. Everyone knows it's your ideas. So Rabbi Yochanan turned to Rabbi Ami Rabbi says, how come you couldn't say like Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi? He hit the nail on the head. He knows how to say a word. He knows how to comfort. Exactly. So the Gemara wants, that's just affecting Gemara. Why was Rabbi Yochanan so mad in the onset anyhow? What was he so mad about? Rabbi Yochanan, why was he angry? So said, now this is critical because we're going to see a big shitta of the Maharam Shik, and it's based on this Gemara. But Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, the pasuk says, "Agura ba'olamcha elamim." I will dwell in your tent. Elamim sounds like two worlds. I'll live in both this world and the next simultaneously. How is it possible? Says the Gemara. Ela Amar Dovid to Hashem, Eibusha should be your ratzon. That people should quote halachas from me in this world, because Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rashbi that a Talmud Chacham was already passed, so his soul's in heaven. But they quote Dvar Shmuel Mipiv. They quote Torah, but they quote it from his name in this world. Sifsoisav doivavish bekever. His lips quiver in the grave. So he's living in both worlds. His neshama is in Gan Eden, But even his body down here, there's some type of, however it's manifest in the physical body, but there's some type of physical sensation, and the lips are quivering, are moving. And as Rashi says in Gemara, it means the body has hana. A body wants to be alive. Interesting idea to think about. The body gets physical pleasure by being alive. And once someone passes, this is like the only way to give them that sensation. So what's the Gemara saying? That's why Rabbi Yochanan was upset at Rabbi Lazar. If you're going to say things and don't give me credit, so people will quote these, but not from my name. So I won't be zoiched. It has to be in the person's name. So when Rabbi Yochanan was comforted and told that, don't worry, everyone knows it's yours, so that must mean that when people quote it, even if people just say, we heard from Rabbi Lazar, but it's almost like, I don't know, laced into the teaching is the fact that it's yours, so you'll experience sifsois of Dovid bekever. No, because I don't know, it's still a shy. Rabbi Lazar will teach the ideas, but then they'll teach somebody else, and then will everyone be aware? Anyone that quotes will be aware it's Rabbi Yochanan? I don't know, do you have to say the person's name? Apparently, if you just say the halacha, it doesn't count. That's why Rabbi Yochanan was upset. But why was he comforted? Because people will quote the halacha knowing that it's yours. So apparently it's just enough to quote the halacha. That's about maybe gula loilam. Here it's about sifsois of doiva v'espekever. It could be different. Okay, right. For form of redemption. And yeah, so this is one of the basic fundamental gemaras about plagiarism. Rabbi Lazar was being accused by his own Rebbe of taking credit for ideas which is not his, and at the end the Gemara, Rabbi Lazar got out of it. There is now. Join me in number 7 in the Magen Avraham. The Magen Avraham writes in number 7. This is Magen Avraham in Siman Kuf Nun Vav. Siman Kuf Nun Vav in Orach Chaim. It's not a very long siman in halacha. It speaks about the halachas of business during the day. But the Magen Avraham has a long piece where he collects many statements that are found throughout Shas that for some reason are not paskened anywhere, particularly in Shulchan Aruch, like laws of Lashon Hara and this and that. And here he says like this. He says, first of all, Im shamadin, if you heard a din, v'nira loy sha'alacha kach, and you think the halacha should be like that, you're allowed to say it b'shem adam gadol ki heichi de lekibli minei. First, the Magen Avraham says, if you have a halacha that you feel is correct, you're allowed to pass it on in the name of a chacham in order that it should sell. Right, yeah, exactly. I mentioned the other side of the coin. And his raya, one of them is from Psachim Daf Kuf Yud Beis. The Gemara says in Psachim, Rabbi Akiva was arrested by the Romans and he spent his last couple of years of his life in prison. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would visit him in prison. And Rashbi said, Rebbe, teach me Torah. And Rabbi Akiva said, no, can do. He said, it's going to put your life in peril. Rashbi said, if you don't teach me Torah, I will get my father Yochai to inform the government on activities that you did that they don't know. And your suffering will be even worse. That's what he told him. As if to demonstrate the urgency he had. Right? It was like so Rabbi Akiva says, you think I don't want to teach you? More than the calf wants to nurse from the cow wants to nurse the baby. I want to teach you more than you want to learn. But it's not safe. So Rashbi said, but who was it not safe for? For the calf. For me. Are you worried about what they're going to do to me? So it's my danger, and therefore I can make the call. I want to learn. So Rabbi Akiva taught him 5 things. One of them was, he said, if you want to strangle yourself, do it on a very tall tree. Which is understood to mean that if you want to teach a halacha, right, take on the responsibility to teach a halacha to the masses, you can hang yourself on a big tree. Rashi and the Rashbam, who we have in Psachim, debate on what this means. The Rashbam says, It means quote you. If you know that your Rebbe has an important halacha, quote his halacha and quote it in his name in order to have the full effect. Rashi says no, it's talking about your own halachas. So the idea you come up with and you think it's true, you're allowed to pass it off in the name of a big gadol, right? Reverse plagiarism. But says the Magen, hang on. But in the end of Masechta Kala, it says, we're still number 7, it says if you say something in the name of a chacham who you did not learn it from, you cause the Shekhinah to leave the Jewish people. So how can you do that? So he says, I don't know, it seems like I have a contradiction. The Gemara in Psachim, the way Rashi understands is, you're allowed to pass off your ideas in the name of a big guy in order that it should be accepted. In Masechta Kala it says you can't do that. He says, he doesn't have an answer. The Chidah has an answer. The Chidah, number 10, in his Sefer Machzik Brocha, over there in Simon Kufnan Vav, it's a little old, so he asked the question, and he says the case in Masechta Kala is talking about someone who's a real student. He's still in his beginner stages of learning, right? So what? He comes up with a halacha, and he's so sure it's correct to the point he's going to quote in the name of a big Rav. Chutzpah. What a chutzpah. So cocky, so overconfident. He's good in the Shechinah to Stalak Mi Yisrael. But says the Chidah, the case in the Psachim was Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. You're talking about where the student is already a great rabbi in his own right. So he has halach, he wants to pass off, he knows it's correct. The issue is people are going to say, who you? Who you? But he knows who he is. He knows that he is fitting. But the Olam doesn't recognize him. All right, so then he just attributes it to a great man. The Chidah says, then you can. Very interesting answer, the Chidah. There's no contradiction. But Akapanim, this is all in reverse plagiarism. But continues the Magen Avraham in number 7, the last line. He says, but what about real plagiarism? Kol she'einoi omer Dovid b'shem omrei over balav. If you take credit for an idea that's not yours, you think just Pirkei Avos, you want to bring Gula to the world, which is a big thing. You're over in a lav. You violate a loisasa. You violate a loisasa. Really? What are you talking about, violator? What are you talking about? If you so Rabbi Akiva Eiger, now the Magen Avraham says, look in the Dorim. It's not there. But Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, look in number 8. No, what? Somehow it got in. I don't know, somebody wrote that. Somehow it got stuck over there. Rabbi Akiva Eiger in his footnotes on Shulchan Aruch sends us to a medrash. The medrash is found in the Tanchuma Parshas Bamidbar. In number 8, I didn't quote it from the Tanchuma, but it's from the Yalkut Shimoni, which collects, and in Parshas Bamidbar it quotes, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's a pasuk in Mishlei. Guys learn Mishlei. Al tigzal dal kidalhu. Do not steal from the poor because he is poor. Which has many meanings. What simple meaning is, don't steal from him because he's poor. Because he's poor, he can't fend for himself. Who's going to stick up for him? He has no connections in society. He's from the destitute, so I'll just take advantage. That's how many understand the pasuk. But Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol mi she'einoi omer Dovid b'shem omrei. If you take credit for an idea that's not yours, the pasuk says about you, Al tigzal dal, don't steal from the impoverished. So says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, this is what the Magen Avraham means. You violate a loisas. It's not from the Chumash. It's not a regular. It's a loisas from Shlomo HaMelech, from Nach, from Ksuvim, from the writings, part of Tanakh, from Divrei Kabbalah. Al tigzal dal. You cannot steal from dal. So the Magen is partially over balav. Very serious. Very serious. Very serious indeed. On the other hand, join me in number 5, because this is where a lot of the confusion arose from. In Choshen Mishpat, Siman Reish Tzadik Beis, the Ramah quotes on Mordechai. The Mordechai is one of the Rishonim, right? One of the great students of the Maram of Rothenburg. Nebuchadnezzar and his family were murdered. Where's Akeidah? He would tell us. In the Rindfleisch massacres, 1298, the myriads of Jews were murdered. Some give astronomical numbers of how many Yidden were murdered at that time. The Mordechai, it's in the end of Perek HaMafkid in Baba Mitzia. The Mordechai says, and in number 5, there are more quotes. Ukumai, just like it's osur likrois mimeno, just like it's osur to read from a book that you're watching. Somebody that gives a book to you, you're going to be a shomer. He wants you to watch it. If he pays you, you're a shomer sacher. If he doesn't, shomer chinam. He entrusts books in your hand for safekeeping. Are you allowed to read from it? No, a shomer can never use the item. Unless you're a borrower or you're a soicher, you're hired. But otherwise, a shomer, you're a watchman. You can't read. Kach osu lahatik mimen. You can't copy from it. You can't say, well, I'll just open it and I'll just copy for myself. Even one letter. But Heni Mili, the Ramah quotes from the Mordechai, if the shomer is an Amharitz, so then the guy that gave it to him never expected that the shomer would want to read it at all. Right? He'll put it in the in the basement, in the corner, and that's it. Aval Talmud Chacham, if the shomer is a Talmud Chacham, and he doesn't have this sefer, how's he going to hold himself back from it, right? How are you going to hold yourself back from opening it? Mutter, he's allowed to read, and lahatik, he's allowed to copy from it. Kivadai, certainly, adai to the hachi of kidai. Definitely, when the person gave it to you, it was with this understanding that you would use it. That's what the Ramah quotes from the Mordechai. Comes the Sameh, number 6, this is the Sameh, the main commentary, well, with the Shach, on Choshen Mishpat. He says, Mio, however, if you look in the Mordechai, in the end of HaMafkid, he writes, and the Beis Yosef and the Darchei Moshe quote this, on this that the Talmud Chacham is allowed to be matik, to copy and to learn from the book he's watching, because it's similar to if someone posits money to a businessman or a banker and the money wasn't tied up, that's another din you're allowed to use it. The Mordechai then says like this, the efshar, I'll give you another reason why the guy is allowed to read the book. It could be because we say in Medrash Mishlei, there's another pasuk in Mishlei, right? So one pasuk we saw was Al Tigzal Dal, don't steal. But there's another pasuk in Mishlei that says, Lo yavuzu leganav ki yignov. Do not belittle a thief because he stole. Right? Do not humiliate, do not belittle a thief because he's a ganav. That's what the pasuk says. So what does that mean? What, a guy's a thief, you put him in his place. So don't belittle him? What's he doing stealing? So the Medrash says, She'ein levazes l'misha goyin of divrei Torah. The Medrash gives a few pshat, and one of them is, we're not talking about a regular thief, we're talking about someone who steals divrei Torah. U'matikoy, and copies it. And don't degrade him. Do not belittle or degrade such a person. And the Mordechai quotes this Medrash, and he says, maybe that's the reason why the shomer is allowed to read the book. It's taka stealing, but who cares? So the Smeh says, Ulafi high time, according to that reason, mashma, that it's mutter, even if you know the guy doesn't want you to read it. The first reason is that the giver gave it knowing you would use it. But if he stipulates, don't use it, you can't say that. But according to the second reason, who cares if he stipulates? There's no gneva by stealing divrei Torah. But says the Smeh, here's the issue though. The Maram doesn't quote this Medrash, doesn't quote the Hemshech of the Mordechai. The Adarab, the Rama only quotes the other reason, that the first reason, that we assume that the Mafkid intended that you could read the book. It seems clear that the Rama holds, if you know that the guy cares, you can't use it. And even the Mordechai only quoted the Medrash B'derech Efshar as a possibility, not a certainty. But this Semeh and this Mordechai gave room for the notion that maybe there's room to say that stealing divrei Torah is mutter. How do you steal divrei Torah? How do you steal divrei Torah? Quoting the idea without attributing to the fellow. That's how you steal to divrei Torah, right? Chassidische Gneva used to mean somebody had ksovim, manuscripts of Mamorim. You would take the ksovim, copy the mimer, and then give the guy's manuscripts back. So it's just you're just stealing the teichen, you're stealing the intellect. That was a Chassidische Gneva. Then a Chassidische Gneva became you actually take the manuscripts, you don't give them back. And then what manuscripts? As long as you're stealing from a chassid, you can steal his car, you can steal his wallet, you can steal his house. Chassidische Gneva. But originally you're stealing intellectual theft. But it says you can't steal divrei. Not just that, look at number 9, there's a Tosefta in Baba Kama. The Tosefta in Baba Kama says, now this has many ways of flipping and translating these words. Hamizganav me'acher chaver. If somebody steals from somebody else, a wise man, a chaver, a chacham, v'hoilech, and then you go, v'shoyne pirkoi, and you teach the idea, afapli, even though you're called a ganav, zoicha la'atzmai, good for you, good for you. Shenemar, the pasuk that the Mordechai mentioned in Mishlei, lo yavuzu l'ganav, don't belittle the ganav because he stole. And not just that, in the end, mismana parnas alat tzibur, you're going to become the rabbi. That's it. We know where these rabbis, we know where they all began. And you're mazaker the rabbin because you're teaching ideas to the public. We don't look at the fact that you didn't attribute it. Look at the fact that you taught the rabbin this idea. And it's a chus for yourself. But it ends up saying, you pay for what you have in your hand. It's a big riddle of how to understand the last words. There are many interpretations. But forget the last words. The beginning definitely sounds like it's okay to take the ideas and run with it. Just like the Medrash Mishlei, the Mordechai mentioned. But here you have the Magen Avraham based on the other Medrash in number 8 that says you're over alav if you steal someone's ideas. So you have to look at this in number 11. Go to the next page. So far you see it's nishta zoi pashut. You know, there seems to be psukim and medrashim going in all directions. In number 10 there's a sefer called Avas Tzion. Avas Tzion. This is from the Noida B'Yehuda, Rabbi Yechezkel Landau. And Rabbi Yechezkel Landau, the great rabbi in Prague, many Sforim we have from him. One of them is the Avas Tzion, droshos that he gave. And it was printed by, it was put together by his son. I think it was only printed at even a later point, one of his Einiklach. But his son, in number 11, his son Reb Shmuel Landau, great scholar, he gave a drasha, and in one of them he says like this, Oifen at number 11, he's talking about the different sins that Talmidei Chacham could stumble in. He says the second one is a stumbling block, a crime that an Am Ha'aretz could not falter in. For example, a sin through Limud Torah, and the Aveira came through learning. For example, one who studies other people's works and plagiarizes. Hamislabish b'tala she'ein shalom. You wear someone else's tala, someone else's cloak. U'mischabed b'divrei Torah shelo yom haba. You're getting honor for Torah that you did not toil in. You did not sweat for that. You did not break your head. You were not up at night. Someone did all the work. It's one thing you and then you take it and give a shir, but at least mention the guy. But you goizel es losai. Which, by the way, a big chakira about this whole thing is, when it comes to quoting the source, the originator of the idea, if you don't do that, is the issue that you're depriving him of the zchus, or that you're pashat a thief? Is the issue that you're fooling the masses, you're a thief, or you're just not giving credit where credit is due? The difference is, what if you say, I saw somewhere? That's the big difference. Shamati, I heard, I saw somewhere. You don't want to say where you got it, for whatever reason. Right? So you're being honest to the crowd, it's not your idea. So you're not a thief. You're not a thief. You're not mislabish b'tala she'ein shalom. You're not portraying as if it's yours. So you're not a thief. On the other hand, you're not going to have sifsois of doivavois bekever, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar. You're not going to have that. The schus won't be given to that person. So Bechal, there's a big shaila, and I think that this could be a debate. You see different sources. I think there could be different views on this question. I think this is the crucial question in the whole issue. Is the idea about attributing to the one who came up with it, or just don't take credit for it if it's not yours. The difference is, if you just say Shamati or the Isi, do you actually have to say who you heard it from? What's considered real intellectual honesty? The fact that you say, I heard from someone, I saw someone, it's good enough. But in order to be Mevi Gula La'ilam, right, if Esther would have just said, I heard from someone, wouldn't have helped. And in order for Rabbi Yochanan's lips to be Doivavois Bekever, to be quivering in the grave, it needs to be with his name. On the other hand, the Magen Avram said, if you steal it, you're over belav, is only if you steal it. On the other hand, the pasuk we learn it from is, don't steal from the poor man because he's poor. Maybe that means that you have to give it to him or else you're causing him to be poor. Maybe it's not enough to say, I heard. It's not enough for you not to be a thief. You have to attribute it to its true owner. That pasuk in Mishlei actually may be telling you, you have to attribute it to the real. It doesn't say don't steal from the poor. Don't leave him impoverished. And if you could quote in his name and you don't, you're leaving him impoverished. Maybe you could say that. Maybe. But let's go right to number. So says Reb Shmuel Landau, he gives a drasha. He says that this is an issue, a major issue, that people are wearing other people's talesim. Someone else's cloak. Or go down a couple lines, that in these days, harbe talmidim, it's common, that did not spend enough time learning, and they want to be misgadol ba'atorah, they want to wear a crown that's not theirs. And my father, Adoni Avi Moiri Verebi, my master, my father, my teacher, the Gaon Zatzal, the Noid Yehuda, he screamed about this. It was Erev Rosh Chodesh Shvat, Tov Kuf Lamed Zayin, 1777, when he finished his Sefer Noid Yehuda. And I continued my father's work. Thank God I was able to publish some of my father's other Sfarim, etc. And my father had tremendous pain, and he was mechiach his students and the Bnei Torah that wear talesim that aren't theirs. These are the words that came from his mouth. And look at Va'ata Aleichem, and to you, the scholars, I tell you. I put my attention towards you. Do not stumble in this crime. And don't think, hang on. Didn't Chazal say in Medrash, we saw the Mordechai in number 6, and the Tosefta number 9, Al Yavoizu Leganav Ki Yignav. Don't belittle a thief who steals. It's mutar lahatik. That means, and the Mordechai learned, I'm allowed to copy from the guy's book even without him desiring. Chalil alachem, God forbid to think that you're allowed to take credit for someone else's Torah. To something you heard from somebody else and come across like it's yours. Chalila. You know what the Mordechai meant in number 6? If someone entrusts a sefer for you to guard, right? So you are allowed to copy the sefer. For what purpose? For you to study for. You're touching the item you're supposed to watch. So the Mordechai said, A, he knew you were going to do it, so he understood. And B, you're allowed to steal divrei Torah. That's what it means. That's a chassidische gneva. But to then publicize it and publish it as if it's yours, the Mordechai never said that. Maseh, that's stam theft. That's what he says. He says, that's only to copy, to learn, and to know. But if you would tell it to somebody else, of course you have to say where you got it from. He said, you know who says this vart? My father, the Noid Yehuda. He was Mayrich Ma'oid and Hizir Ma'oid. The Nobi sturmed about this. And he said everyone got it wrong. Everyone is misquoting the Mordechai in number 6. The Medrash the Mordechai based himself on, the allowed to steal divrei Torah, meant someone else you have a sefer, you have chidushim, so I'm going to take it and copy. So now I have it and I'm enjoying it. That's what it means. But for me to pass as if it's mine, that the Mordechai wasn't talking about. That the Medrash isn't talking about. The Medrash isn't talking about that. Now I will say that the Tosefta number 9 is mashma that it is. Because there it's mashma you went and you taught the idea from your friend. Although it's not so clear, it says Hoylach V'Shoina. It doesn't say you taught it, it says you learned it. The Tosefta number 9, Kemeneb Zakvetchtan. But Akoponim, the Noidi B'Yehud is very clear about this. So here's a major irony. Ready for this? Ready for this irony? We've mentioned quite a few times in the past, the Noidi B'Yehuda had a student, he had a grandson, Rabbi Lozer Landau, the Yad HaMelech on the Rambam. And he was a Rav in Brod, together with Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolis, Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, and there was there was a discord between these rabbis, many halachic issues, and very, very sharp words exchanged between the different parties. This Rabbi Lozer Landau wrote the Yad HaMelech on the Rambam, and he was strong-minded, but I mentioned in the past that he was a real Rav. During the cholera pandemic, in the town, there were a number of homes that parents had passed away, and he had all these little kids there. And he said, I'm going in to help the kids. And they told him that we'll catch the disease. He said, listen, I'm the Rav. If I'm not going into these kids, who's going in? And he went, he took care of the kids, he caught the illness, and he died. So he put his money where his mouth was. But he did have an unpleasant relationship with Reb Shlomo Kluger. Unfortunately, Reb Shlomo Kluger was one of the greatest scholars of the day. And they had many debates. And Reb Shlomo Kluger ended up printing a sefer called Shiva Einayim. You can see it online. And in it, he is demolishing many ideas from a certain Rav, namely the Yad HaMelech. And in number 12, I got a copy over here. Ezu Dorosh Harav. Another thing the rabbi, this is Reb Shlomo Kluger writing about Rabbi Lozer Landau, the Yad HaMelech. Another thing the rabbi was Dorish in front of Miudov, in front of his cohorts, Bebeso in his house. That it's mutter to steal a drasha and to wear someone else's talis. The head of Mokum was there, and what was the Yad HaMelech's raya? In the words of the Shach, Simon Reish Tzadik Beis, which we quoted there, that Ramah and the Smeh, Shemefalful Shom B'divrei HaSmeh, and the Ir Shushan, that's Levush, Ubesoiv Dvor of Kosev, that there's a medrash that you're allowed to steal Divrei Torah, the things that we saw already. Oid, in addition, Mitam Al Yavoizu Leganev, right? Don't belittle the Ganev when he steals. Valzeh Samach Harav. So the rabbi relied on that you're allowed to steal someone's drasha and say it in your own name. Plagiarism is mutter, apparently. So says Rav Shlomo Kluger, that's what the rabbi said. But you know what the truth is? Ein lismech advar, don't rely on that. V'lo yasikein ish yosher, any straight person, hoilich, who goes straight, and because over there he says mamish the same vort that the Noida B'Yehuda said. We saw number 11. When the Ramah, the Mordechai, the Smeh, what they're talking about is you're allowed to steal Divrei Torah, to copy, to learn from them. Someone entrusted you with their manuscripts, so you want to steal a peek and copy the ideas. But to say them over in your own name, no, you can't do that. And v'loy lechinam, why did Chazal say, if you say to Hashem, Gula Lo'elam, if halachically you're allowed to pass it off at your own, why would Pirkei Avos say, you want to bring redemption, say it in the name of who you heard it from? And the Magen Avram says further, it's not just a Pirkei Avos thing, or Gemara and Megillah, but if you don't say B'Shem Rima, you violate a lav. So the Magen Avram says you violate a lav. And then you have this medrash that seems to be mutter. So said Rav Shlomo Kluger, there's no contradiction, like the Noida B'Yehuda. The Magen Avram is talking when you pass it off as your own. The medrash is talking about you're allowed to steal from someone's ksavim for yourself. And he quotes a Yerushalmi also on Loi Sigzol Dal Ki Dalhu, which is like the medrash we saw in number 8. The Yerushalmi says, what can you steal from a poor person? Right? It's like Yankel wakes up middle of the night, his wife Bela says, Yankel, there's a thief in the house. Danke is good. If you find something, we're lucky. What can you steal showing from a dal? It means in Divrei Torah, when he quotes it, he doesn't quote in the right name, and you violate a lav. So there's Yerushalmi as well, besides the Medrash Tanchuma, that's the Magen Avraham got it from. Either Mordechai and the other Medrash that says you're allowed to steal, it's talking about stealing the ideas so you can have in your own library, but to pass it off as your own. So I sort of usher-wise says something doesn't match up over here. In number 11, Reb Shmuel Landau, the Noidib Yehuda's son, says how much his father student and screamed and riled up the populace about this issue, about this very issue. Hello. And then you have Reb Shlomo Kluger claiming that the Yad HaMelech says Bechlal Mutter. The Yad HaMelech is a Noidib Yehuda's grandson. He grew up actually by the Noidib Yehuda, his Zayda. He was very loyal to his Zayda. How could it be that his Zayda Shturim was the major Shturimmer against us? His Zayda was the one that gave the difference between the din of the Magen Avraham and the Medrash of the Mordechai. And all of a sudden, he makes a 180 and he says, nah, no problem to steal. And Shlomo Kluger is the one who has to quote the exact same word of the Noidib Yehuda. So I sort of Oshavais Tainas, he doesn't think, it can't be that it happened. It must be somebody spread a rumor. People were telling Shlomo Kluger, you want to hear something else? The Yad HaMelech said, you want to hear something else? But in truth, see, Rabbi Oshavais says his gut doesn't let him believe this actually happened. It's to say he was completely unaware when his uncle Reb Shmuel Landau says how much the Rebbe spoke about this. So that's very interesting. Anyone that discusses this topic, okay, gets into a well-known debate between the Machne Chaim and the Maram Shik. Both of them were students of the Chassam Sofer. The Maharam Shik was one of the most famous students of the Chassam Sofer. And the Machne Chaim was younger than him, but he also managed to learn by the Chassam Sofer while he was a bocher, and then he learned under the Ksav Sofer. And the case was like this. There was a Sofer in a certain town, okay? There's a Sofer. And I guess to boost his reputation, he published a Sefer. Lo and behold, the entire Sefer was plagiarized. Everything in there came from somewhere else. And he published it like it's, so there's one thing when you give a shir and you tell over an answer and you don't quote it, but here to publish a sefer and none of it's yours, mazeh, is completely fooling the masses. And the issue was so severe that Rabbanim thought that maybe we can't trust it. If this guy could be so unscrupulous to deceive the masses, who knows what he's doing while he's writing Sifrei? There's so many ways that, right, tefillin are written, anything's out of order. I mean, how can you trust this guy? He's not honest. A sofer, a shaykhid, the first thing you need is honesty. Because many things, they're the only ones that'll know. If it's kosher or not. No one else will ever know. So the question came to the Machne Chaim. And in number 15, the Machne Chaim has a tshuva where he says that first he quotes the Sifri. The Sifri says there's a pasuk, Loi sasik gvul reyecha, you can't encroach on the gvul of your friend. Says the Sifri, you know what we're talking about? Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua have a debate. And you're quoting over the debate and you mix the names. You mix up the names? Names! It's like Borchim always tell me, right? Who cares about names? Right? So I tell them, oh, you heard about the last football game? This team won. No, it's the other team. Names. Who cares? The point is somebody won. Who cares who? They said, no, of course it's about who. Same thing in learning. It's not just the idea itself. It's where does it come from? By the Maharal writes in his Derech Chaim on Pirkei Avos, the Maharal says that if you don't quote something in the name of who said it, once you're not picky about who said it, you're not going to be picky about what they said either. In order for the word to be pristine and kept well guarded, you need the one who said it, If you care about who said it, you'll care about exactly what it was. Once you lose who said it, then the whole idea becomes, will be watered down, it will change over time. It's not pristine, it won't remain preserved. That's what the Maharal says. Anyhow, back over here. So the Sifri says if you even mix up the names, you violate the law of loy sasi gvul re'echa. So says the Machne Chaim, if you can't even attribute one rabbi's idea to another, right? You for sure can't attribute a rabbi's idea to yourself. So you violate a loy sasi gvul re'echa, according to the Sifri. But then he says, not so sure. It could be the Sifri is talking about a specific Rabbi Les and Rabbi Yeshua. The Sifri doesn't say anyone, it says those two names. You know why? Because between Rabbi Les and Rabbi Yeshua, it's always known halachas like Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer was Shamuti, where you mentioned recently. Rabbi Eliezer, we don't paskin like him, the Gemara says in a few places, because he was Shamuti, which either means he came from Beis Shammai, he was part of Beis Shammai's yeshiva, or he died in Cherem. The very sad story of him dying in Cherem. But either way, we always paskin like Rabbi Yeshua against Rabbi Eliezer. Says the Machne Chaim, maybe that's why the Sifri says, if you're going to mix up the names, it's not stam, you're inaccurately quoting. You're going to give the wrong halacha. That's destructive. That's destructive. It's catastrophic. But quoting another rabbi's vort as your own, you can't really say the same that same catastrophe will occur. But then he goes and says in number 15, I'll tell you what I think. If a person clothes himself with someone else's Torah and doesn't say the guy's name, he's a thief. Taka, maybe loy sasi gvul, the Sifri is limited to that case, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yeshua. But I think gneva, I think regular thief, regular theft. You're an honest thief, right? It's like the mother was asked, what do your kids do? I have one son who's a lawyer, one's a doctor, the other one's stamaganav. But his guy's stamaganav, he's stamathif. I, the guy that was stolen from, what's he losing? He says, what do you mean? Are you allowed to take someone's item from them without their knowledge and to have benefit because they're not losing out? You can't just, that's theft. Unless it's something the guy has no problem with from the outset. But who wouldn't care that their ideas are being plagiarized and no one's giving them credit? If somebody toiled in Torah and it's his item, then naturally a person would care. So how could Johnny come lately just come and take it from me? I am not losing out. Just come and take my item and then you'll return it when you're finished. That's called theft without permission. Borrowing without permission is not called borrowing, right? And then he continues. He says, but maybe you'll tell me that you can't steal wisdom. Maybe knowledge is not substantial, you can't steal it. He says, what do you mean? There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin. If a goy learns Torah is chayiv misa, right? And the Gemara there says, where do we learn it from? Moshe, that Torah was instructed to us, the Jews, by Moshe. It's a Meirasha. It's our inheritance, right? Or it's more, Meirasha is actually not inheritance. It's, what's the English word? It's, no, what's the word? Not a legacy. When someone has a tradition, a national family tradition. A heritage, thank you, a heritage. Meirasha is a heritage. Yerusha and Meirasha are not the same thing. Yerusha is an inheritance. Meirasha is a heritage. The difference is a Yerusha, you yash in the house, then you sell it, you give it away. Heritage, you can't give away, you can't disown, it's who you are. The Torah is a Meirasha toss, you can't give it away. Anyhow, but the Gemara says that the Torah is our possession. So if a guy learns it, he's chayiv mitzvah because it's one of his 7 mitzvahs, theft. Now for theft, he mamish gets killed. When it comes to learning Torah, although he's chayiv mitzvah, right, the Rambam said we don't actually kill him. So it's not mamish theft, but he is chayiv mitzvah in Inyan because it's within the realm of theft. So says the Machne Chaim, what do you see? By his name was Reb Chaim Sofer, by the way. Not related to the Chassam Sofer. A student of his, they both happen to have the same name. So says the Machne Chaim, you see that you could steal intellectual theft. So if you take someone's idea and don't attribute to him, it's Geneva. He wants to say it's Pashut Geneva. It's stealing. By the way, I didn't mention this, but the Shalah writes, stealing someone's ideas is worse than stealing their money. You steal somebody's money, you hurt them financially. You take their Torah ideas, you snatch their soul. A person's Torah is their nefesh. It's their soul. It's their essence. What someone puts into their Chidushei Torah, it's their sweat, their blood, their tears, it's their exertion, it's their energy, it's their chayas, it's their nefesh. Says the Shalah, if you plagiarize, oh, what did I take? I didn't take anything from him. That's worse than taking the guy's possessions. The Shalah writes that. So the Machne Chaim says at least it's equal to regular Geneva. The Maram Shik in number 14 says, no. I don't think so. He wants to die. I don't think so. Why? He says, I saw in the Sefer of the Machne Chaim that he writes, if someone steals Chidusha Torah, and the question was, is the Sefer possible because of it? And you were Meirich, etc. I'm in number 14, about 8 lines in, V'tmaheni. Why didn't you quote the Gemara in Yevamos we saw in number 3? He brings a beautiful raya. The story of Rabbi Yochanan angry at Rabbi Lazar, because Rabbi Lazar didn't quote it in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan was appeased when he was told that everyone knows it's your idea. And the Gemara asks, why did Rabbi Yochanan become so incensed in the first place? My nafkamina, Rabbi Yochanan, what's the big deal? And the answer was that Rabbi Yochanan he was concerned he would lose out on the schus of Sifsais of Dovid Bekever. Frekt the Maram Shik, but Machne Chaim. They were both students of the Chassam Sofer. If you're right that there's actual theft, so that's why Rabbi Yochanan was making a shturim. He was protesting the theft of his student. The name there's actual theft, or because loy sasigvul from the Sifri. So when Rabbi Yochanan thought that Rabbi Lazar was violating that's why he screamed. What was the Gemara Shaila? What bothered Rabbi Yochanan? Because Rabbi Lazar was violating Gnei Vingzela. That's why. His dear student, by telling over the own shir of Rabbi Yochanan, was violating Gnei Vingzela by not quoting it in his name. So that's why Rabbi Yochanan was irked. The Gemara doesn't say that. It gives Epis a whole medrashic explanation. It must be because there's no legal issue. Must be. However, he says, I do think there's an issue of a midvar sheker tirchak. If you teach something and you pass on like it's somebody else's, midvar sheker tirchak. You're saying it over as if it's yours. It's not honest, it's not true. Or there's gnevas das. Gnevas das means when you fool people. You're fooling people. They think you're a groiser chacham. You're fooling people, right? He says it could be those issues. But these issues are much more iffy. They're much more in the air than actual theft. Like the Machne Chaim wants to label this guy a ganav. Says the Maram Shik is not a ganav, but he does violate Gnevas Das, Midrash Sheker Tirchak. But you know what Reb Zusha Vanapola said? Midvar Sheker Tirchak. From a Dvar Sheker, from something false, Tirchak, you become far from God. From a Dvar Sheker, you become far from God. There was a Chassidish Rebbe who said that all harchakas, all distances are from the rabbis. And the Torah gives you till the morning to say Shema. Chacham said Chatzos. The first Mishnah Masechta Brachos, Chachamim always make harchakas. They distance us to make sure we shouldn't violate a deraisa. All harchakas are rabbinic. There's one which is deraisa. Midvar Sheker Tirchak. That's biblical. The Eibusha cares more about Sheker and Emes. So this is what the Maram Shik tainas. So the Maram Shik was chaylik on the Machne Chaim. It's not as serious as he wants to say. So according to the Shalah, it's mamish like stealing a person's soul. The Machne Chaim said it's posher gneva. It's mamish gneva. It violates the Issa Dorais of gneva. That's what he wants to hold. It's Gezel Gomer, he says clearly. The Maram Shik says it's not true. It's not Gezel Gomer. It's not. It's just Gnevas Das. You're fooling people, but it's not actual. It's not the biblical violation of Gneva and Gzela. So this is all about when somebody wants to pass on someone else's idea as their own. You know what often happens? You're learning something, you come up with an idea, you come up with it, but then you see that someone else said it before you. Do you have to credit it to that person? Or no, I came up with it, it's my idea. Why do I have to quote it from them? It's my idea. In number 13, the Evan Ha'ozel, Rabbi Isha Zalman Meltzer, passed away in the early 1950s. Great scholar, and after the Rebbe became Rebbe, he wrote him a beautiful letter and brochus. He writes in his introduction to his commentary in the Rambam, he says, I need to tell you something, number 13, that often you'll find things in my sefer which are found in earlier Sfarim, the Mikevas HaMishnah or Sameach, because when I wrote my sefer, I hadn't seen them yet. But now I've seen that they're there. But nonetheless, I didn't remove these ideas. Number two, these are my ideas. They also said it, but I said it too. I'm not taking it from them. And number two, I should remove them. But what if someone doesn't have that sefer? They won't see it at all. In addition, we don't always write the idea exactly the same. So there's differences in the way I'll present it to them. So how about though after each time it happened, I should say that, oh, by the way, what I wrote, I found in another sefer. He said, I didn't find that important to do. However, the Stei Chemed writes that if you came up with an idea and then you find it's already elsewhere, you should write. You should write that I saw it, write the idea, and finish off by saying Shuvra Isi, then I saw elsewhere. The Evan Azel says he doesn't believe it's necessary. The pasuk that says Ubirtsoinam Ikrushar, with their will, Shimon and Levi, they uprooted the ox. Shur stands for Shuvra Isi. Birtsoinam, if you want, Ikrushar, you can uproot the Shuvra Isi. You don't have to write the Shuvra Isi. That's the Evan Azel's take. The Stei Chemed says you gotta write. You always have to attribute it to where it came from, even though you didn't get it from there. You only happen to find out. Intellectual honesty demands you always attribute it. And you know what's so ironic about this? Because the Stei Chemed was once asked, why was he so fortunate that his Sfarim, which are great Sfarim, was so popular? And he said it's because of an episode that happened when I was a child. What happened when he was a child? He was a bacher. And he was learning in some base medrash. There was another fellow there, another bacher, who was extremely envious of him. The Stei Chemed was brilliant, and this guy was envious. So the supporter of this yeshiva lived in a house next door, and he had some maids. There was a certain girl that was a maid, and she would come early in the morning and clean up the base medrash, put the svarim away, clean up the table, put the coffee out, put some cake out, and she would come before the bacher. So this other bacher told the girl, I want you to concoct a story that this Stei Chemed Chizkiah, the Medini Chizkiah, that he came in and he tried to seduce you and he wanted, and you had to flee, and so she went ahead with it. And the next morning, early in the morning, she starts screaming, and all the neighbors wake up, and what's going on? And she says, because Chizkiah was the first bacher that would come every morning. He came, he tried to, the story went everywhere. Could you imagine? And he was like dumbfounded, like, how did this happen? Like, mazeh. And the story was catching like wildfire, that this elite bacher is not what everyone thinks. He's up to things you wouldn't imagine. Ein teiche kabare. And after a couple of days, this girl felt really bad. So she approached the Stei Chemed and says that I'm happy to go public and tell everyone the truth. He said, no, don't do it. He said, because Taka, I'm shamed now, but I know with God's help, I'll make it later in life. I'll be able to pick myself up and may. But this other bocher, if word will get out that he concocted the whole Maisa to frame me and to bashmutz me, it would destroy his reputation to the point, I don't know if he'll ever recover. I can't do that to him. So years later he said that he thinks that's the schus of why, because he had to suffer the humiliation, as if it was true. And because of that schus, his Sfarim was so popular. Even the Frierdiker Rebbe very much wanted to print his Sfarim in New York. So it's interesting that when it came to his personal suffering, he didn't say, let's go back b'shem Omri. He said, no. We'll let the buck stop by me. But when it came to accrediting Divrei Torah, if he came up with an idea and then later he found that it's from else, that someone else already said it, obligated to write it. You have to be transparent and share the truth. But when it came to that shameful story, there's no transparency there. I'll take it on my shoulders. Very interesting irony about that. But there's another, just to end off with another thing. So that's pretty extreme. Do you always have to write Shuvra Isi? Like, why am I obligated? I'm not stealing. I came up with it. The Stei Chemed, though, said you should. We see the Even Ezel says he doesn't feel it's necessary. But another case, which is debated, is like this. You were learning an interesting sefer, and this sefer happened to quote to you some random source somewhere for an interesting tidbit. You would never have found that source on your own. Only thanks to the middleman, to that sefer that compiles that you were learning, he sent you the address of a very interesting source. Okay? Which happens all the time, especially these days. So many Sfarim just compile, and they did the work of locating these interesting source material, but now you have the source material. So when I give a shir, can I just quote the source material, or do I need to say where I found it? Is that part of Homer Dover B'Shem Emrei? So it's interesting, the Rebbe often by Fabrengens, there were times he would quote a random posuk, and he would say, I saw it in Encyclopedia Talmudis. And you wonder why the Rebbe would say that. Which Rosh Yeshiva would, in middle of his shir, say, as it's brought in Encyclopedia Talmudis, as if revealing where he got his ideas from. So one way of understanding was that the Rebbe wanted to learn whatever sefer will work to help your learning. Don't be too cocky. Oh, I can't learn these modern, help books. If it's going to help learning, don't be embarrassed. Don't be. It's not below your dignity. But I think there's more to it. I think the Rebbe might have felt an obligation, because according to some, there's an idea that in such a case where the middleman has revealed to you, gotten you in touch with a far-off Rishon or something interesting that's not commonly known, you need to give credit to where credit's due. Who came up with this? The Machne Chaim again, but in number 16, it's a different piece elsewhere, where he says, I wonder if you hear from your friend an interesting svara or a chakira or a new chiddush that comes from one of the Rishonim, but your friend revealed it to you. When you quote it, do you need to quote your friend? So he says in number 16, the bottom, he thinks you do. He thinks you do. It's often, it's interesting. Often you hear people speak, give shir, give a lecture, and they quote, an interesting source, and they say it's brought here and here. Like you wonder why they're telling you where they found it. It could be you have to. Now the Machne Chaim Bechlal is very machmir. We saw in number 15 that when it comes to actual plagiarism, he believes it's real theft. So we understand he's going to be machmir. But he says like this. He says a beautiful thing. It's unbelievable. He says the medrash we saw in Tanchuma, where it says you shouldn't steal from the Dal. The one we saw in number 8. Don't steal from the impoverished. Rabbi Yochanan said it means don't plagiarize. He says, why are you calling the source material impoverished? That guy's a wealthy man in knowledge. What do you mean don't steal from the rabbi because he's poor? How is he poor? He says, you know what it means? It's talking about the middleman. The middleman's poor because it's not his ideas. The sefer that you got that compiles and collects, that sends you to interesting, that guy's poor because the ideas, none of them are his. He's just a middleman. He's the shadchan. He's the shadchan pairing you up. He's the Tao, and about him the Medrash says don't steal from him. That's his interpretation. And therefore he says, he thinks, look what he writes at the end. Hold on, he thinks that you actually do have to mention the middleman, but he ends off saying, but I'm not so sure, because there's a new chiddush that I haven't seen. Not just that, he says, I know I don't keep this. Yodaiti ba'atzmi, that I wasn't careful about this. And I ask from anyone who's a scholar to clarify this matter. So, just to wrap up, if you came up with the idea and then you see it says elsewhere, the Steichemet says you're right, shuvra isi. You need to. Or else it's borderline taking credit for someone else's idea, even though you came up with it on your own. The Even Azul clearly says he doesn't think you have to do that. If it's your idea, it's your idea. A step above is when you really do owe credit to someone, the Shatch in the middle guy for enlightening you with some random information. The Machne Chaim is the one who really pushes for this, and right, and you feel that there's a lot of truth to that. And then there's the classic case of mamish plagiarism, where the Shalosh said it's like stealing the soul. The Machne Chaim said it's regular theft. The Mamshik said it's just going of das habris, it's just fooling people. Although we saw that somebody in Brod was publicizing that it's okay based on other medrashim we saw, the pasuk in Mishlei that don't harass a thief if he stole, and we saw the Noid Abusers said that's talking about something else. That's talking about when someone gives you a book to hold, you're allowed to copy the ideas for yourself. And then we mentioned briefly the other side of the coin, reverse plagiarism. When you want to say something, you want it to sell, so you quote in the name of a big Rebbe, a big Tzaddik, a big Chacham, a big Gadol. And that really needs a shir on its own, because there's a lot to talk about that. But we saw an interesting word of the Chidah, who says that if you're sure the idea is a true idea, you're certain. You just need to sell it, then you can say in the name of the Chacham. But if you're not holding there, then it's out of line. It's out of line. It's audacious. It's cocky to do that. Okay, we will end over here.